fucker. Hello and welcome to the channel today. We love swordplay and freedom around here. Found some bunch of content that Blaze TV has put out recently that I wanted to address, so that is on deck. But first I should state the channel motto: be without fear in the face of your enemies. Be brave and upright, that God may love thee. Speak the truth always, even if it leads to your death. Safeguard the helpless and do no wrong. That is your oath. If you have a problem with that, please click the f off the channel. Nobody wants you here. We only want freedom-loving people who are not trying to do wrong in the world. So, without further ado, let's get it poppin'.
A huge following. I don't know why. It's dumb as hell. I was always wrong. It doesn't matter. The anti-American forces, and they pretend they're the pro-American forces against us. And same with this other woman, who is apparently a Facebook star. And they're talking about how to save democracy, how to promote democracy and liberty and individualism and everything else, because you're the problem. Our views are the problem. And then they claim out of one side of their mouth that the founders are the problem, and then out of the other side of their mouth that they're the real progeny of the founders of the country. This has gone on long enough. It's gone on in colleges and universities. It's now going on in government-run public schools. It goes on in the media. It goes on in entertainment, whether it's plays or movies or everything else. These people wrap themselves in democracy. They wrap themselves in individualism, and they get away with it. Maddow has a huge...
False flag operations. They have learned from the best. You know, CIA's been doing it forever, and they are executing it flawlessly. They are wrapping themselves in the shroud of freedom, and it's completely disingenuous. They want to take all the freedoms that we have and impose their agenda upon the masses, because they believe that they know better. Our ignorance knows no bounds, and they want to attack and control us. Well, I also believe that their ignorance knows no bounds, but I believe that we can interface with them and show them love and compassion and help them understand that we're not some sort of robotic evil army with laser beams that come out of our eyes, like the leadership has told them, which is why they're so rabid. I mean, these are normal people for the most part. They can be reached, but there's been so much rejection. The only people that they've found who will accept them have this evil agenda, and that is why they're so lost. I'm not going to give up on the system, fixing the system. I'm not going to give up on these people. I'm not going to give up on shit. If you want to make me give up, you better pack a goddamn lunch. Okay. Now we're transitioning to... Boom! Sorry, I gotta block the screen, otherwise I keep getting copyright crap, even though this is fair use. Reaction videos are fair use.
You said something that I absolutely believe, and it is crazy to say it now. I think we absolutely blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
Well, of course we did.
Yeah, absolutely did.
Well, yeah, and I think it's a big deal. I mean, on many levels, it was an environmental catastrophe. I mean, like a profound environmental catastrophe. It's also an act of vandalism, which I'm against. You should build things, not destroy them.
Yeah.
It was also an attack on infrastructure, and more than anything, it was an attack on our closest NATO ally, Germany, which used that pipeline to fund its entire manufacturing center. We just attacked our ally.
I know.
This is insane behavior, and I don't know why no one's been held accountable. Yes, we did it, whether it was through Poland or Norway. A NATO nation did it with our assistance and approval. And like everyone knows it, and everyone's afraid to say so. Why? I don't know why.
Can you say that?
I just did.
Well, no, but I mean,
I'm unemployed. I can say whatever I want.
I mean, as a, what are the ramifications of? Thank God that Russia has not retaliated. This is the biggest. This is the worst act of war I have ever seen us make. Right? So,
and it's crazy. It's the kind of like late stage hubris on display with people.
It's all of it.
It really is. Like, I'm God. I can do whatever I want. There are no consequences. The rules don't apply to me. And when you adopt that attitude, when there's no humility at all or long-term thinking, this is, people who don't have, like, a stake in the future, like 80-year-old presidents, they just don't care. And when they start to behave like that, you can actually wreck the whole thing. You can take a country down doing stuff like that, in my opinion.
Just absolutely brilliant. I mean, clearly, the lackluster investigations, and I mean, Wikipedia can't be trusted, but let's just, I mean, we're not trying to do a research project here with 10 different sources. The broad strokes are that there was an investigation. Let's see. An explosion was on 26 September, an explosion was detected originating from Nord Stream 2. Pressure drop was reported. 17 hours later, same occurred to the other pipeline. And then let's just go to cause. Sweden's prime minister said it was likely sabotage. Denmark said tremors had been detected that were unlike those recorded during earthquakes, but similar to explosions. Investigations, I mean, these were half-assed, lackluster. Everybody probably knew. The NATO community was probably informed that this operation was going forward. Russia wanted to be part of the investigation. I doubt that they would blow up something that makes them a ton of money and makes Europe dependent on them. I more suspect that the U.S. would help in its destruction to make sure that they wouldn't be weak and in a natural gas shortage emergency decide to turn the pipeline back on. So let's just blow it up so you can't do that. Oh, man. And this is why you've got some issues in Germany. One of the reasons. You got some political parties that are starting to gain traction. They're thinking about banning them. Last time they banned political parties, that went really well with them. Speculation. Russia first accused UK, then United States as being responsible. There's possible Ukraine involvement. I don't know. I'm not going to get into that. Environmental impact. This is the best. The released. Let's see. The leak set a record as the single largest discharge of methane, dwarfing all previously known leaks, such as the Aliso Canyon gas leak. So methane is much more, as greenhouse gases go, methane is much more bad. It's bad, way worse than CO2. This is why the big debate about cow farming and all the methane they release is such a big deal. People are like, cow farts. I mean, there's much more CO2 released, but the impact of 1 part per million of methane versus 1 part per million of CO2 is not equal. So less methane can have a more catastrophic impact if all the research is correct. And then also the shockwave is stated to have killed marine life within a radius of 4 kilometers and damaged the hearing of animals in 50-kilometer radius. An estimated 250,000 metric tons of seafloor sediment containing lead and tributanin used in anti-fouling paint have been lifted up. Additionally, the area is contaminated from the dumping of ammo and chemical weapons. So just a bunch of brilliant stuff. After World War II, Europe was like, yeah, just dump the chemical weapons in the ocean. That's the best way to get rid of them. Hey, good job, guys. You're really smart. It's the leadership is really stupid sometimes. Good God. Anyway.
I talked to him about the media, completely determined to suppress the truth. Listen.
And I really thought, Tucker, and I don't know if there was a turning point with you. There was with me when I realized, oh my gosh, none of these people in the media actually care or are intellectually curious at all. They're just typing away, doing their thing, reading a prompter. Nobody is actually, because I really thought if I could make the case, which you did, Every night you are making a great solid case. And if you are intellectually curious and you disagree, you go, well, that can't be right. Let me look it up. Let's do some investigative work on what he just said. They don't do that. And that shocked me.
But then you have to wonder why. So it's like no one in Washington or in the media is ever triggered, is ever outraged by a lie. So I can come out here and tell the most preposterous lies, say the most lunatic things. You know, climate, you're driving a Suburban is causing more hurricanes in Florida. Well, they say that every fall.
Right.
And that, it's like insane. There's no evidence that that's true. There's a ton that's evidence that's not true. Nobody cares. But when you say something true, that's actually true, deeply true, people become hysterical and call for your murder, and certainly call for your deplatforming. So then, well, what conclusion do you reach? The media are completely determined to suppress the truth things that matter. That's kind of why they exist. Yep. They are the gatekeepers that prevent people from saying out loud the truest things.
Cut 3. Here's Tucker on what he saw at the summit and the candidates that I found surprising.
When you got up this morning, did you imagine that you would see not one, but two presidential candidates light themselves on fire in front of you?
When I get up this morning, as every morning when I wake up, I don't imagine anything.
Right.
I haven't had a drink in 21 years, and every single morning I wake up hungover. I feel like I've had a quart of Stoli and a 6-pack of some rotten beer. I just feel horrible in the morning, every morning. And so I put my pants on, I shuffled downstairs and got coffee, and so I didn't think about it at all until I was seated across from Senator Scott, who was the first. And I really like, I like them all. Like, politicians are super charming. Like, they're good with people. That's why they're in this business. So I like all of them. But no, I do think that Republican voters, or the system controlled by the Republican Party, doesn't ask a lot of its candidates. It's like enough to repeat certain bumper stickers from the 80s, peace through strength, lower taxes, whatever.
Right.
I'm for all that, by the way. But they don't, like, no one ever gets pushed very hard.
Right.
And so it doesn't take much. I was certainly not acting out of hostility, but if you're just like, well, what do you mean? Get into the question. And then people's like, oh, you're so mean. Really? You're trying to run my country.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I live here. I have 4 children. I can't go anywhere. Like, what do you mean? You're trying to run the country, and you're mad that I'm, like, trying to get you to be more precise about your answers that you should have memorized already?
Right.
Because you're presuming to represent me?
Last cut. This is Tucker in my special on Blaze TV. You can watch it.
Just freedom stuff, I have to say, spun me up. It did. You can't be like, well, I'm for religious freedom, except for, like, priests who say things the government disagrees with, they can be arrested. Huh? And it'd be fine if it was almost any, and I'm holding him to an unfair standard, but if you hold yourself up as a Christian leader who's in favor of religious freedom, well, then you kind of have to defend religious freedom, whether it's popular or not.
It's not, no freedom. Nobody has to defend my right to say, chocolate's delicious.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, it's unpopular speech that needs to be defended so that when the power shifts too much in one direction or the other side is still allowed to speak out and bring moderation and rationality back into the conversation. No one cares, what you had for dinner. Stop taking pictures of your food and stop, thinking that free speech is for nonsense. Just like the Second Amendment is not so that we can have hunting rifles. It's the foundational document of our democracy, our republic, constitutional republic, and it stipulates that if corruption gets to the point where the free speech and the free media can't put it back in check, this is the last resort. It's not for hunting. It's not for, just so you can be cool. It's literally to protect people, you, Americans, from oppression, from bad actors, from people that don't have your best interests at heart, They only have their own interest at heart.
It's popular. You have to, and I don't think even our side understands that. I was, when Bill Maher said, you know, I think the Saudi or the hijackers were braver than our fighter pilots. I disagreed with that 100%.
Me too.
But when ABC fired him, I stood up for him and said, what part of politically incorrect don't you understand?
Make sure you go to blazemediasummit.com.
Okay, this is another. So this is a lot of stuff about the Nord Stream pipeline Tucker wound up bringing up, but it's important because I don't hear really anybody discussing this stuff. Actually, before we get to this, since we were talking about misinformation, let's go over here because I heard this the other day and I think this was
If
great.
you're losing your hair or just want thicker hair, I highly...
Hopefully this is the correct clip.
For more and more of us, search and social media platforms aren't just our window into the internet. They serve as our primary source of news and information.
And our way of communicating, right? Not just news and information, but we are communicating with each other on here. Anyone who wants to make a video, has something to say, can write a post or record a video, react to other, things that are going on in the world, and help highlight the things that people need to pay attention to and not go along with if they want to continue to enjoy being an American. And it's also disingenuous because he's going to speak about this stuff like what needs to be protected is to keep the voices of American citizens from accidentally erupting and saying that they have problems and issues with the way things are being run. It's correct statements, but directed disingenuously at people instead of at the media organizations and the corporations that are funding the fake news and continuing to play into the clickbait content where they are just trying to drive views. They're not trying to make the world a better place.
No one tells us that the window is blurred, subject to unseen distortions and subtle manipulations. Right here in the United States of America, we just saw a sitting president deny the clear results of an election and help incite a violent...
We saw a corporation who has the power to silence the voice of a president and remove them from the discussion. So again, it's all about framing. This person is trying to protect the machine, and the machine is trying to protect you from real information getting to you, and is trying to curate and make sure that the people who are speaking stay inside the speaking lines. We don't want people departing from the prearranged topics that we are going to discuss. And that's why Trump was such a crazy presence and people weren't used to it, is because he was actually, questions were being asked, he was giving raw answers instead of curated, planned, scripted responses, which is what you get from most other people. You get scripted responses and then no action behind them, just empty promises.
Insurrection at the nation's capital. Not only that, but a majority of his party, including many who occupy some of the highest offices in the land, continue to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the last election and are using it to justify laws that restrict the vote. What does still nag at me, though?
Then they're arresting the person that they have to compete against in the free election in order to take him off the table, but that's not manipulation. And then sending billions of dollars overseas to another country but not helping an island that we own, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, they're great stewards for your freedom and for representing you, and for continuing to propagate the corporate agenda through the media. They continue to defend the social media platforms and say that it's great that they're censoring real information from real people that doesn't fit the narrative. Personal experiences. You can't talk about personal experiences if they go against the terms of service and the WHO and the authorities in that realm. Even if you have questions, we should be allowed to question. I mean, there's people on the left who are questioning the legitimacy of Oliver Anthony and saying he's right-wing propaganda. This song is fake. It's not real. He's funded. It's astroturfing. All these claims. I support that. I support their ability to question it. I think it's important to question the system, question what's put in front of you, and try and do a little bit of research yourself. Get multiple sources and try to figure out what's really going on. Not just be presented with one single authority and narrative that you should just believe. There is no alternative to just belief of what we tell you. That, on its face, it doesn't matter what's being told to you. Being told to behave that way and just listen to the fact checkers and believe the stuff that we classify as misinformation is indeed misinformation, when you've had huge changes in the understanding of what was going on, that the thing that we all stayed inside for in 2020. You've got huge changes in science and medicine that happen all the time, and it's important for us to continue to innovate and move forward. The reason we've been able to do so is speech is so freely allowed that debate and challenges to authorities come out very quickly, and bad information is quickly dismissed because they're worried. Like in real life, you don't get misinformation. People lie to your face every fucking day. And so the idea that you can't handle that online, you can't figure out when people are fucking lying online, is tantamount to treating you like children or people that are not capable of existing in real life and talking to humans and understanding the fabric of reality as it unfolds around you. They want to remove your autonomy and replace it with exactly what they want you to see.
Was my failure to fully appreciate at the time just how susceptible we had become
True.
to lies
Yep.
and conspiracy theories.
From the government and from
Despite having
corporate
spent
media.
years being a target of disinformation myself. Social media companies already make choices about what is or is not allowed on their platforms and how that content appears.
Yep.
Both explicitly through content moderation and implicitly through algorithms. The problem is we often don't know what principles govern those decisions.
We do. It's called lawful but awful. That's how they're treating content that doesn't align. So it doesn't technically break the law. We can't murder you or incarcerate you, but we can suppress your content, suppress your voice, and because they don't want someone who's saying that there was an issue with a product or a treatment to be playing before an advertisement that promotes said product or treatment or whatever. They want to curate a seamless experience that you buy into 100%. There's no debate. There's no questioning anymore. It's just blind obedience, and put on your listening cap, because that's all you're supposed to do.
In some cases, industry standards may replace or substitute for regulation, but regulation has to be part of the answer.
Mm-hmm. I actually agree. The internet should be regulated under the constitutional amendments. If this is the town square, then it should be subject not to the private company's ability to refuse you service and refuse your voice, but if this is the new, because we're allowed to assemble and meet under the first, let's see. Yeah, it is first. Allows people to gather for peaceful and lawful purposes. If you have a problem, you are allowed to assemble and organize and express your displeasure. So I think that the idea that a company who is the steward of our ability to have free speech with each other should be regulated by the federal government, which represents us, because we pay the tax dollars to elect these, to to pay these people's salary. That's another problem, is the money in the election. But anyway, the social media companies should be much more tightly regulated. Right now, they set their own policies on speech. So the corporatization of free speech in America is a huge problem.
Beyond that, tech companies need to be more transparent about how they operate. So, as citizens, we have to take it upon ourselves to become better consumers of news, looking at sources, thinking before we share, and teaching our kids to become critical thinkers who know how to evaluate sources and separate opinion from fact.
The thing about that is that you have to allow people access to information. You can't say, hey, get the best sources of information, and then cut off certain sources and restrict your ability to understand. Because if there's bad information out there, if it's free access to information, you can do research on where did this bad information come from that's saying this thing? And then you can also do research on the other side and say, oh, where is this information coming from? And then you can try to figure out the source, the intent, the motive, and you get the whole picture. By removing some information, by keeping people out of Hawaii and not letting media photograph and document the situation as it unfolds, you're creating a vacuum. You're creating a vacuum that's being filled with conspiracy theories. I don't know what's true and what's not, and neither does anyone else, because the information is being suppressed and we're not being given open and fair access to the emergency situation as it unfolds. So there's a lot of people that are starting to ask questions. Well, why would you hide things if you don't have anything to hide? Why would you say that the media can't go in? Why would you say that people can't take photographs and enter the areas where their burned homes are? I mean, the fire's done, so it's not like they're going to get burned. Why? Let's have an explanation for why children were sent home from school and then supposedly their parents weren't notified, and now you have all these missing children. There's a lot of issues here. And we're just supposed to act like everything's great. Good job, Joe Biden. You gave everybody in Hawaii who lost their home $700. You gave Ukraine $40 billion. You left $50 billion worth of military assets in Afghanistan, which was inherited by our sworn enemies, the Taliban. But all this is fine. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, potentially. I mean, who else would do it? Russia didn't do it. And there's no third party out there like, South America, some South American. Argentina didn't come over and blow up Nord Stream. Someone with direct correlated interest in blowing that pipeline up did so. So, I mean, they're doing it in front of your faces now. They're not even trying to hide it. They're not trying to act like it's free and open and fair. Because after the trial run of, obedience training for 2 years where everybody just went along with it, they believe that they really can get away with pretty much anything they want, and they can make you do whatever they want.
I mean, I don't know.
I'm not claiming you did it. No. I'm just kidding. No, I don't know. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Do you know who did it?
Seems pretty obvious. It was backed by the Biden administration, I would say. I mean, I think all the evidence suggests that, but I wasn't there. But I mean, that seems like a huge step. This is the largest industrial sabotage in history, sent more carbon in the atmosphere than any act ever. And there's weirdly no curiosity about who did it. And I think that's strange.
It is strange, isn't it? It's very strange.
How do you feel about it now?
And this is Tucker's most viral moment. So I'm just broadcasting this out because I don't, not everybody's going to go over here. So hopefully you stumble across my crap and you see this here. Because some of these questions, I like someone that asks questions and then doesn't feed you. Let's just get the discussion going. Use your brains. I want everybody to use their brains. I'm not empirically right, and I'm not empirically wrong. I'm just a human being that has a bunch of questions. Things smell kind of fishy, and I'm kind of looking like, where's the dead fish? Why does it smell fishy in here?
In retrospect.
How many COVID shots did you take?
0. but I think it's fair, and I could see that you recoiled when I asked you that question. And I don't think, honestly, you should be asking people about their medical care, but that became a matter of public policy. And I do think that the whole country ought to pause and assess, like, what did we just go through? How do we feel about it now? And so it's a very straightforward question. 81 million votes.
So the idea that you're free, but you have to take a medical procedure to retain employment, that is still a technicality, and technically, yes, you could quit your job. You're not losing your civil rights on a technical level, but if you believe that to be part of modern society and survive, in order to eat and have a place to sleep, you need a job, then you're only one step removed from legal mandates that put you in jail for not complying. So it was as close to a test run as you could possibly get, and the reaction was pretty muted.
Votes.
People went along with it.
15 million more than Barack Obama. Twice the population of New York City more than Barack Obama. What do you think of that?
In terms of Biden?
Yeah. 81 million votes. They are saying that Joe Biden got 81 million votes. And my question is, do you accept that? And second, how do you think he did that? So I have to ask you, since you were a witness to, and in some unintentional way, a participant in one of the most widely covered events in American history, January 6th, what was that? Do you think that was an insurrection? What are the big issues on which you disagree with your donors? A lot of the people who are pushing censorship, in fact, I would say almost all of them, in both parties, particularly the Democratic Party, claim they're doing so in order to protect democracy. But how can you have a democracy with censorship? What is the goal, do you think, in Ukraine? When do we know we've achieved it?
They will not define it. And
what do you think it should be? If you have a child who's born a boy, I want to become a girl, he hasn't gone through puberty yet, he's say 10. Is it treatment to prevent him from going through the natural process of adolescence? How is that treatment? It seems not like treatment. It seems like something else.
Well, you have to, Tucker, I hope that we'll be able to talk about.
I don't want to get controversial here, but I mean, sometimes we do have treatments that are accepted at the time, but in hindsight, like lobotomy, upon closer inspection and reflection, it turns out that maybe we should have been a little bit more considerate and thoughtful when we were evaluating the effectiveness of this treatment, especially on humans. The idea of sticking an ice pick up someone's nose and modifying a part of their brain in order to produce more suitable behavior is pretty crazy. So is hooking people up to shock devices. And I think I'm not saying that clearly there's debate about it, but I'm saying that we are being a little bit quick to say this is great. We're not really being thoughtful and considerate and taking the time to figure this out. We're just doing a lot of very crazy things that traditionally, even a few years ago, we would have said, oh, probably elective surgery for a minor, when they can't we don't even really let them choose what they wear sometimes or what's for dinner because they just eat pizza all the time. Yeah, I just don't know if that's right. I don't know if it's right to start treating adults like children and saying, hey, the child knows best, and then treating children like adults. I don't know why else you would do that unless you're trying to create an environment where a child could consent to things that normally only adults do, like things like taking drugs, maybe some sort of sexual encounters. Maybe we want to send them to war. I don't know. But you can't really argue with the idea that if you're letting children make decisions for themselves, you're trying to create autonomy. So, I mean, if you want to be autonomous, you should probably get a job and have your own place and make your own decisions and choose what medical treatments that you want to get. So if that's what we want for children, then yeah, I guess we're going to fundamentally change the growing up process. It's no longer 18. Whatever the age is where they get full medical autonomy over their body, they should be allowed to have full autonomy as to whether they want to remain at home. They should be able to drive. I mean, if they can elect to I mean, it used to be you couldn't even get a tattoo or a piercing without parental consent. If they can make these kind of decisions, then I fully support. I am a freedom-loving American, and I support an unrestricted freedom mandate for children where, you know, at, let's say 5 years old, they get the same freedoms and rights as adults. They sign up for selective service. They can enter the military at 5. Let's just open it up. I mean, let's be fair and logical and make sense across the board. If children can make perfectly good decisions just as good as an adult at 5 years old, then let's take the brakes off. Let's stop restricting them. Give them freedom. These 5-year-olds should be, you know, stop oppressing them with their parents making their decisions. It's terrible.
Of issues. I know that.
Well, this is one of the biggest issues in the country, and I think every person in this room would agree that it is a central issue because these are children who are being altered permanently, and you can defend that alteration, that change, if you like, but there's really no debate about whether or not it's permanent. And so I think it's fair to ask you in a calm, rational, and I very much hope polite way, why you would support that. No, but you said that children should be able to choose their gender and their parents should be able to affirm that, and the state has no role in getting involved. So how is that different? You're saying that a child shouldn't be able to choose a bathroom, but he can choose his sex? I don't understand.
Let me finish what I said. Let me finish.
Oh, I hope you will.
If you don't mind.
Well, please do. And I will stop with this, but you have repeatedly described delaying a child's natural progression from childhood to adulthood through adolescence. You described that as, quote, treatment. And so that raises I mean, clearly you've answered the question. You believe it's treatment. You believe, I suppose, that people can change their sex. Because if you don't believe that, you wouldn't call it treatment, would you?
Oh, he hates him. Look at the death stare.
Why do you think the people who swarmed the Capitol on January 6th were mad?
I hope that he plays the part where Pence says that the welfare of Americans is not his concern. Hopefully that's in this clip, because otherwise we're going to have to pull that up. We're losing our mind as a country when politicians can seriously sit on the stage and say that the decisions should be taken away from the parents and given to the children, while also saying that the government has no place in the discussion. If the government has no place in the discussion, then F off and stop talking about it. Stop talking about it. You know, just like Denzel said about racism. Or was it Morgan Freeman? One of them had an interview where they were like, how do we solve racism? He's like, stop talking about it. Stop referring to me as a black man. I'll stop referring to you as a white man. We're just two men, American compatriots or whatever, comrades, as some half of the country seems to want to call each other. Comrade American. Yes, comrade American. How are you today, comrade American? You know, like, look at how that's working out for the places that call each other comrade. Is it going great? I mean, are they leading the world? Who's leading the world? China's only rising because we're feeding that communist monster, because they're capitalist, communist. They're a capitalist system that is dictated. The terms of said capitalist system are dictated by the communist system. And we are sending them all of our prosperity and helping them rise. And the manipulation of the economy is causing them to possibly be entering a depression at the moment. They have a lot of issues with the economy in China.
And why haven't we talked about that? They were American citizens. Most of them didn't commit acts of violence, and they were really mad. And they were mad because they thought the election was unfair.
Right.
And I wonder why more time hasn't been spent by either party reassuring Americans that our elections are real, that all votes are counted, that the electronic voting machines, which no one seemed to trust 10 years ago, now are infallible, why mail-in voting is a good thing. Like, why doesn't anybody try to reassure the public that the mechanics of voting are legit? And are they? Do you?
I will never stop saying that I mean, mail-in is prone to fraud, but that's been around much longer. People in special circumstances, if you're overseas deployed, you can't go to the voting place always. It's kind of needed. But by introducing voting machines, you're taking a process that's supposed to be transparent and understandable, and you're obscuring it behind computer code. Unless you're a computer programmer and the code is open source, we can't see how that counting process occurs. So this should not be allowed. You shouldn't be using electronic counting. This should be a human process that is controlled by humans, because this is understandable and straightforward. Once you introduce the voting machine, now you've got very complex internal workings, aka computer code, that cannot be deciphered and understood without a third party for most Americans. So now you have to put your trust in the computer code expert telling you, yes, the computer code is intrinsically sound. There's no errors, and there's no bias, and there's no line of code in there that says, every 20 votes skew one to this side or that side,
I think the last election was fair. 10 years ago, Democrats said, look, electronic voting machines can never be secure. And of course, that's obviously true. Anything electronic can be subverted.
Yep.
Real countries don't use electronic voting machines. Are you confident that a country with electronic voting machines, ours, can have an election that you're participating in that everyone can trust? In point of fact, no state, including ones with Republican governors, has really done anything about election integrity. They have not restored elections to what they were in, say, 1992, where you have paper ballots, you have voting on the day of the election, and you have voter ID. Like, these are super simple, but no one's done it. Why? I don't think anyone would say Joe Biden was a great candidate.
No.
Didn't campaign.
He didn't campaign at all.
He was not a figure who commanded respect among Democrats. They made fun of him. I'm not attacking the guy, but that's true.
Right.
Nobody in Washington said, I want my kid to grow up to be Joe Biden. And yet, at the end, he's got 81 million votes. 15 million more than Barack Obama, who, whatever you think of him, was a very talented politician, and I think smart. So, how did he do that? The censorship regime in place during the last presidential election, and by the way, I think it remains in place.
Okay, hold on. Let's
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President. Have you? I know you're running for president. You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years. Yeah. Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. Right. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. And yet, your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. Right. I think it's a fair question to ask, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from...
My God, suicide. Political suicide, right there. He just asked, where's the concern for Americans? Not my concern, Tucker. This is what he said. He sat there and said this with a microphone in his hand. What a genius.
From you before, but that's not my concern. I'm running for president of the United States because I think this country's in a lot of trouble.
Yes,
I think Joe Biden is weakened America at home and abroad.
Good God. Good God. That's foot and mouth.
Ah! In the federal agencies, telling information providers, the social media companies, what they can and cannot run. No one's been held accountable. Meanwhile, Julian Assange is still in prison thanks to our efforts. Would you pardon him, and would you hold those people who are violating the First Amendment accountable? The U.S. government reads the private communications of American citizens by the tens of millions without a warrant. And everyone knows this. It's been revealed. They've admitted it. And no one has moved to stop it. Do you think that there's a good reason to allow this?
Too.
One of the things that we've learned in the almost 3 years since the last election is that various government agencies, intel agencies, law enforcement, FBI, CIA, NSA, were involved in shaping public opinion about the last election. They interfered with our election. And that suggests to a lot of people that maybe those agencies have too much unchecked power. You've worked in government. What do you think? So you and the vice president too, but you're the only elected leaders in an executive branch that's the largest human organization in history. Millions of people, okay, work for you. And a lot of them just hate you because they're all partisan Democrats. And they work to subvert you from day one. And again, we've just seen this at scale. What do you do about that? Like, what do you do about the FBI or the CIA or agencies that are heavily armed and have intel capacities that you don't have? And like, they're vast. How do you manage that? If they're still classifying the JFK assassination docs 60 years later, they're just mocking us, aren't they? So I was just in Eastern Europe, much poorer than the United States. But one thing you notice in the cities I have visited there is that there aren't a lot of, really any, drug addicts living on the streets, ODing on the streets. The so-called homeless problem, which is a huge feature of life in this country, doesn't kind of exist or seem to exist there. What do you think of the fact that we've got hundreds of thousands of people living on the streets and dying there? What should we do about it specifically? There's never been a higher percentage of Americans on prescribed psychiatric drugs, benzodiazepines and amphetamines. It's the highest it's ever been, and SSRIs. And the suicide rate keeps going up. So is there a point at which we say this isn't working, this treatment that we're offering?
We don't know whose cocaine it was in the White House. I mean,
what's your guess on that? I'm sorry.
Shit.
The government of Mexico allows fentanyl to be made in its country and to come over our border.
Yes.
And remittances from Mexico are a huge part of their economy. The Mexican government is party to the murder of hundreds of thousands of Americans. So why is Mexico less of a threat than Russia? Do you think, and would you as president use the US military to seal our southern border? But why wouldn't you just create a human wall of...
So this is a topic that that we just don't fully think through and execute, because right now the left is trying to create open borders to hijack the vote of immigrants that want to come to America. We could create a secure border and do sweeping reform to allow legal citizenship to be more accessible to people who want to immigrate here and be positive and participate in the system. So that is what we should do. If we really want to steal and rip these people's votes away from the left who are trying to sabotage and ruin this country, the most direct way to do that is to create a legal avenue, and we provide that for people that are both already here and want to go through the process, and people who are outside this nation who want to come here. And then all this work that they've done, I mean, let them start the movement and get everything lined up, and then let's just hijack it and take the votes of all these people that they want to bring into the country, by giving them a route to becoming a true American, paying taxes, voting, and being able to legally stay here and contribute and be positive addition to our country. We only talk about the border wall. We don't talk about a solution. We talk about the problem, and the Democrats talk about the problem, and they say, oh, just leave it open. That's the solution. So they're more solution oriented than we are. We're just trying to prevent and stop people from coming in, and that looks really bad. So, I mean, some of these issues, if we just put a little more thought into how we express ourselves, because I think most normal Americans don't have a problem with people legally coming to the country. Most of us have come here legally. We went through the process. Our grandparents went through the process. Beautiful. Great. It's extremely American, all right? We just need to make it so that these people have access to legal immigration, because the only issue with immigration is the illegal, law-breaking part of it. Something like that. Sorry, it was probably bad, but...
American military personnel and just kind of fix the problem immediately. We could afford to do that. We don't want to do that for some reason. What am I missing? It's the carnage in the United States that I think most Americans are worried about. So you just described Mexico as a friendly country, and we need to help Mexico get the drug cartels under control because they're killing people in Mexico, but they're also killing hundreds of thousands of people here, and nobody seems to care. So we can argue about, what the policy solutions are, but it's the emphasis that I think is very striking to a lot of voters. Like, where's the outrage? 100,000 people die of poison sent through Mexico, and we call them a friendly country? I don't understand. I wonder what you do with the millions of foreign nationals here illegally, many with fake papers, who are here. Like, what do you do with them? You become president.
Yes.
Sworn in January 2025, and you've got, let's say, 7 million people.
They have to go through a legal vetting process, and in that situation, we have to show them compassion because we've been fighting inside this country. Half of us want people to come in here illegally, and they've been condoning it and looking the other way, and the rest of us have a problem with that and don't like the fact that we're starting out on the wrong foot. We're starting out with a new person in the country who has broken the law to get here. So we need to get over that, and in the first round, we need to give the people in the country a chance to go through the legal process to become citizens and demonstrate that they are positive additions. They're not criminals. They're not part of an organized crime syndicate. They're not here to subvert. They are here to truly embrace the American way and be part of the fabric of our country.
People who've come in the last 4 years, what do you do with them? Do you deport them? Wait a second, the federal government's knows where everyone is because everyone has a smartphone and they're tracking you. Yes. So we know anyone using a fake social security number, why not just drop them off in Tijuana? Bye-bye.
Well, and I see half the Midwest down in Southwest Florida during the winter months.
And that's a good thing. But when you see half of New Jersey down there, does that make you worry? Speaking of energy in the military, who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
I don't know.
I'm not claiming you did it.
No.
I'm just kidding. No, I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Do you know who did it?
Seems pretty obvious. It was backed by the Biden administration, I would say. I think all the evidence suggests that, but I wasn't there. But that seems like a huge step. This is the largest industrial sabotage in history, sent more carbon in the atmosphere than any act ever. And there's weirdly no curiosity about who did it. And I think that's strange. You recently met with Zelensky, according to news reports. And I'm wondering if during that meeting, as a prominent Christian leader, which you are in addition to your political views, you broached the question of his treatment of Christians within Ukraine. The Zelensky government has raided convents, arrested priests, has effectively banned a denomination, a Christian denomination, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church within Ukraine, has persecuted Christians. And I wondered if you raised that with him. I would think you would have greater concern for religious liberty.
YouTube is banning videos and discussions for the same thing. So this is the things that we accuse third world assholes of doing. It's coming here. We're importing it.
In Ukraine. And I'm surprised
I told you I raised the issue of religious liberty.
No, you spoke to one person who's clearly on one side of it, and there are many, many news reports that are not disputed by anybody that many clergy have been arrested in Ukraine. And I'm merely saying I may not agree with their views. I'm not Russian Orthodox, but you can't arrest clergy for having different views, period. I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President, I know you're running for president. You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years. Yeah. Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. Right. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. Right. And yet, your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. Right. I think it's a fair question to ask, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard.
This dude shouldn't be allowed to wear an American flag pin. That's clearly not his concern. Take that off. You don't deserve to have that on your lapel, and you are going to get run off the ticket immediately because you're just part of the rest of the machine. You don't give a shit about America. You don't give a shit. And you just said it out loud.
Heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern.
Since you are a younger person and spend time with them, we saw yesterday that a group of reservists has been called up to Europe, apparently, to prepare for war with Russia. Of people in the age cohort who might plausibly be called up to do that, what's the response? So why not force a peace?
How would you do that?
Well, you could tell Ukraine, and they are a client.
We won't even go to the negotiation table. We haven't made an attempt. We want war. We're not negotiating. We're just sending tanks and money and missiles. So how could we do that? We could request. I mean, Vladimir Putin only invaded with a pretty small force, and it wasn't going that well because a lot of people believe that he thought he was going to invade and be welcomed to a negotiation table where they could work this out. And when no negotiations were forthcoming, he has now increased the troops. And I just, on raw analysis of numbers, I myself and a lot of other people are aware of the huge discrepancy between the two parties. There's been enough Ukrainian deaths so far that supposedly all of their military personnel have now been presumably replaced by another round of untrained Ukrainians with very little to no combat experience, and the Russians are considering this to be an attack against them, not just the debacle going on with Ukraine, but the response, the economic sanctions and the vilification of that country because the leader has made some decisions. You know, regular Russians. You think that people who hate Trump should also blame regular Americans and say that they're terrible people because they think that Trump is a terrible person? I mean, if you do, then you're just judging a book by its cover. You're someone who you put labels on people, and therefore you negate them.
State of the United States, without American backing, there's kind of no Ukraine. We're literally paying the salaries of their bureaucrats. We want you to sit down, as they tried to do, but were stopped by our government, and stop this war. And reach a peace as one does, where both sides, concede some of their interests. Like, why wouldn't that be in our interest to do that? As president, you'd be in charge pretty much single-handedly of America's foreign policy. So with that in mind, I have to ask you about Ukraine. So in the spring, you described the war in Ukraine as a, quote, territorial dispute. You issued a statement saying it was a territorial dispute that was not central to America's national interest. There was an outcry over this. And then pretty soon after, you seemed to change your view and describe Putin as a war criminal and say that it was central to America's foreign policy. Why did you change, and where are you now? But you're coming from a completely different world. It's not like you were mayor, state legislator. You're coming from business and technology and biotech. So what have you learned? Like, how have your views changed since you immersed yourself in crowds of voters and started listening to people? I watch media coverage and everything's about race. And America is divided by race. That's America's original sin. It's the thing that cleaves us as a country. You didn't mention that. So yes, why do they keep telling me that? Do you think
fucking distraction? It keeps us from talking about issues that affect people of every race, every gender, all of us. The poor versus the rich. Are you being represented? I mean, do you feel like your elected officials give a shit about how your life is better or worse in the past couple of years? Are they doing anything to better the long-term prospects for the American citizen, the average American citizen? No, they're not. They're arguing about whether your children should be allowed to change their gender behind your back and without your consent, through the medical system and with government concurrence.
Climate change is driven by human activity. There are really two questions. One is the climate changing? And I guess we can measure its temperature around the globe over a period of years. But the deeper question is why? We had glaciers 10,000 years ago. The climate has always changed dramatically since the formation of the Earth. So do you think humans are causing this change? And do you think that we can stop or slow it down? Like, is there actual evidence? How concerned are you that in the wake of whatever the next economic disruption that we're going to face is, and everyone kind of feels like maybe there's something coming, that will wind up with digital currency issued by the central bank. Is it my imagination, or are people who weren't raised in traditional religious households, who haven't spent a lot of time thinking about theology, all of a sudden talking about God a lot? Do you notice that?
I do notice that.
You signed
There's a huge return to the Bible and God because we're so lost. Even if you don't believe in the story, it's an excellent read. It unified humanity for thousands of years under the pretenses of what is good and bad, not just for the individual, but for humanity, the human spirit, and children, just animals, everything. Trying, and I know it's not perfect. There's definitely some flaws to it. It could use a few updates, which that is a weird aspect of it, is a whole bunch of people contributed to it, and there's been no new info for a very long time. But at the same time, in times of crisis, people return to familiarity, and this has been something that's been reliable for humanity for a very, very long time.
A ban on abortion after 6 weeks in Florida. Would you do the same as president nationally? So can you just give us your quick pitch? You're speaking to someone of goodwill and good faith, a decent person who has a different position from you on abortion. How do you bring them to your position? What do you say? It's just that a lot of Republican primary voters have gotten kind of cynical because the Republican Party doesn't care what they think, obviously. Yeah. And you just look at the polling, what Republican primary voters think, what is the Republican Congress doing? Like, there's no overlap between the two at all, okay? So it over time, people get a little bit cynical, and they think, but you're in it, so you would know that maybe donors are kind of driving the agenda and not voters. Yeah. Well, and I lived in D.C. my whole life, and that's totally true, and you know it too. So are there cases, can you just name one, where the donors have come to you and said, I really like you, but this is the issue I really care about, where you said, I actually just disagree with you? How many COVID shots did you take?
So candidates spend approximately 70% of their time fundraising. I think they have to come up with something like $15,000 a day for 7 years or so in order to generate the amount of money that you need to successfully get an election funded and win. So, I mean, obviously they're not spending 7 years. They're getting money at a much more rapid rate than that. But that's just a conceptual analysis of how much time and energy it takes to accumulate the money needed to fight a candidate who currently has that money and get that seat out of their hands. And it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem when people are spending that much time, elected officials are spending that much time and energy just focused on getting money in order to get elected. If we could remove that, then that would free up 70% of their time to actually do things that benefit real Americans, to address real issues, and genuinely engage and interface with the American public and ask, what is going right for you guys? What is going wrong for you guys? How can we increase the amount that's going right and decrease the amount that's going wrong? It's just nonsense discussions about how we're going to take your medical autonomy away from you, how we're going to take information away from you, how we are going to take your ability to purchase commodities away from you by inflating the currency and then not making equivalent wage hikes, because the truth is you've had 20% 3-year inflation. Okay, so $2022 was 8%. 2021 was 4.7, so 5 and 8. I mean, those are the reported numbers, so it's probably more like 15 to 20%. Because what they do in each category is like, for the meat inflation, whichever fish, pork, chicken, or beef, whichever one has gone up the least, they select that one. For your staple grains, soy, wheat, things like that, they take whichever one has increased the least. So true inflation is probably skewed upwards a little bit. There's another website called Shadow Stats Inflation. This is shadow government statistics. That's not loading. Okay. So this is showing over 10%. The alternative calculation is blue. They changed the way it's calculated. So the red line is showing 7% last year, back down to 5%. Looks like 5%. So, you know, you probably lost 20% of your purchasing capability. And if you haven't received a 20% increase to your wages, then your overall income has fairly substantially diminished. But anyway, that's enough for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys found some interesting stuff. And I can't wait to talk to you again soon. Take care. I'm not suicidal. I would never kill myself.